Okay, so where did we leave off? Check out the first part to this video in case you missed it, and as usual, thank you for watching Kiara Loves TV.
Kiara loves TV. Yes, I made a theme song so that I can talk about all my favorite shows. Oh yeah!
And this is just your disclaimer that this is not me talking about any of the actors themselves, but more so their characters. Please do not attack me in the comments. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, even those who disagree with me. But let's keep it friendly. Alright, let's get started with the show. In episode 6, Lorelai and Rory go to Sherry's baby shower. Jess gets a car and Luke is trying to figure out how he got the money, and there's a town protester. In this episode, we get another time where Lorelai is encouraging Rory to have a relationship with her family despite her personal feelings. But sure, she's a bad mom. Oh my gosh, spank her hand. When Lane was saying that the concept of childbirth is vaguely disturbing, I totally agree. Like the concept of my parts being ripped. Something I noticed is that when Rory says Jess left his bra in the back seat, Jess actually looks behind him. I don't know what it is, but Sherry just really makes me uncomfortable. I hate when people do that in general. Like if I'm kind of inching towards not showing up, not being there, not being present, let me do that. I'm an introvert. That's like my thing. Lorelai's freakout was a little too familiar. So here's how I'm viewing the whole Sherry and Lorelai dynamic. This is just through my lens. This is not what everybody has to believe. Women like Sherry are such a threat to girls like Lorelai. Sherry is her Natasha, the Elena to her Caroline, the chaotic girl with the dysfunctional background versus the girl who seemed to have it all together. And I know someone's gonna be like, but Elena didn't have it all together. Her parents literally, I know. I'm talking about before that happened. Remember, Caroline was explaining, this is not even a Vampire Diaries video, but you have to remember that Caroline was explaining that even before the stuff happened with her parents, she always felt inferior to Elena. But back to what I was saying. Sherry is getting to experience all the things that Lorelai poured into Christopher that she never got to experience herself. Like think of how lonely she must have been as a teenager alone with Rory to take care of. She was just 16. She was 16 and she had to make a life for herself beyond what she'd been raised with. She had to have more sense than her parents and conquer generational trauma, which is not easy. She had to fight against her natural ways to try and give Rory a better experience than what she had emotionally. She has the uncomfortable conversations because she loves her child. She wants her child to come to her about things even when they're scary. That's love. That's a mother. So of course, after all she's been through, it's hard to sit back and watch someone else benefit from it. I think at one point she did dream of being with Christopher, but she couldn't marry that version of Christopher, and in that way, him and Lorelai are a lot like Rory and Jess. In this one little comparison, I wouldn't say completely they're like Rory and Jess at all. Luke finds out that Jess works at Walmart. Luke asks Jess if he's a gigolo, and it had me crying laughing, because why was that the first thing that came to mind? I know a lot of people have used the devil legging scene as a way to say that Lorelai is a very immature mom, but Jess has pulled way worse pranks than egging a car. I feel like he's the town jerk. Like it's not like they did it to someone who's never done anything mean to anyone else. If they had done it to someone like Babette or Kirk or even Miss Patty, like if they had did it to their car, then yeah, I would have been like, okay, that makes Lorelai, like, that's not a good moment for her. Like that does kind of make her super immature. She's a bad mom. Like I would be on that train, but I can't completely get on board because Jess has done a lot of messed up stuff. And then in the future, he continues to do even more messed up stuff. But one of my questions for you guys was, what do you think the protester was trying to say? Also, do you think Sherry knew something happened between Christopher and Lorelai? In episode 7, this episode is such an iconic episode. I'm so excited we finally get to talk about it. Lorelai enters a 24-hour dance marathon and asks Rory to be her partner. Meanwhile, Rory and Paris are working on the 75th anniversary issue for the Franklin. It actually makes sense that Kirk and Lorelai would have some kind of beef like this because they're both so active in the town. Jamie, a guy Paris went on a date with 3 months ago in Washington, shows up at Chilton. Paris asks Rory not to tell anyone about Jamie and Rory agrees. And Lane is calling Dave and hanging up. I already discussed the Suki and Jackson situation in the video I have called The Downfall of Suki and Jackson. While Lorelai and Rory are at the dance, Dean shows up to watch Rory and Lorelai dance. Then Jess and Shane show up to do the same. Rory and Jess begin trying to make each other jealous. It's clear that Jess is trying to make Rory jealous when as soon as Rory leaves with Dean, he takes his arm from around Shane. Lorelai leaves the dance floor because her heel breaks. Rory keeps talking about Jess to Dean, and you can see that Dean is getting more and more aggravated, which honestly, in this point, he rightfully so, because like, it's one thing for you to have this crush on him, but like to talk to your boyfriend about him and keep pretending like you really just hate him when you really want to walk over there and kiss him, like, come on, Rory, like, come on. But then as soon as you're trying to defend Dean and his emotions, then he does something stupid, which is breaking up with Rory on the dance floor. Then Jess finds Rory at the place they went to in the basket episode. Finally, Rory admits that Dean was right about everything he said, and Jess agrees. Jess makes sure that Rory is broken up with Dean and then goes back to break up with Shane. I think that's what he was waiting for the whole time. He wanted her to be single before trying to pursue a real relationship. I think he was over it as much as Dean was, because it was so clear that they wanted to be together, that she wanted him and that he wanted her. So it was like, what are we waiting for? In episode 8, so this episode has prompted a lot of ranting. If you're not a fan of ranting, might want to skip through this episode. I have so much to say about Richard, and in this episode, I'm talking about like, it was just It was so much to say. This episode takes place the day after the marathon, and the way that Jess and Rory are just staring at each other across the counter, it's just like, oh my god, here we go. Richard is doing his best Emily Gilmore cosplay in this episode. I think it's very important to note the speed that he begins talking when he attempts to manipulate Rory. He talks faster, she can barely get a word in, he doesn't pay attention to her sounding unsure, he just keeps talking. When he said, I certainly would love to show it to you, it sounds like he's tugging on her heartstrings. The undertone in what he was saying was, this is something important to me. I would be very disappointed if you didn't agree. That signals to Rory, and the pressure sets in, because she doesn't want them to look at her the way that they look at Lorelai when she says no. We rarely ever hear Rory say no to them. He says, do you want me to tell your mother or shall I? Almost like a way to say, I know what I'm doing is something that she wouldn't be happy with because she's been reluctant to accept any guidance from us in the past, and I know you'll tell her because you want to keep the peace, and it'll go easier if you tell her. Both Rory and Richard are very aware of their roles. Rory knows that they look at her a certain way. He knows the impact his words can have on Rory because she likes him so much. Because let's look at it like this. If he had all these good intentions, why didn't he ask the maid for more ice? It's like when girls in movies say, I'm going to go powder my nose and force their friend to come with them or ask their friend if they want to come. They're not powdering anything. They're talking about something they don't want someone else to hear. Richard uses the excuse, I need more ice, as a way to throw Lorelai and Emily off his trail. He left the table with an agenda with Rory's name on it. That whole interaction was intentional. He was sharing his experiences at Yale to try and warm Rory up to the idea of going to Yale. It was never casual conversation. Rory tells Lorelai, and it's clear that both she and Lorelai notices a tactic. Even Lorelai directly says Richard is doing this to manipulate Rory. In this episode, it's revealed that Richard was already engaged to Penelon Lye. It sounds like Emily and Richard were seeing each other at the same time as he was engaged. Sounds like someone else we know. Little Miss Bookworm. Richard reveals that he set up an interview behind Rory and Lorelai's back with the Dean of Admissions at Yale. Once again, before Rory can have time to process or react, Richard is interrupting and talking over her. She's clearly not comfortable and having doubts, and he keeps trying to tell her that everything will be fine, despite what she can clearly feel, despite her anxiety. Like, Lorelai knows Rory doesn't want to do it, so she tries to help her, but Rory doesn't want to disappoint her grandparents. That overpowers her. If Richard truly thought that this was all okay, if it wasn't intentional manipulation, then why did Richard already know before Lorelai even said why she was upset, what she was upset about? Then, Richard literally admits to cornering Rory in the kitchen and coaxing her into coming to the meeting, and that he knew the whole time Lorelai was going to have a problem with it, but he did it anyways. And for what reason? Because of his opinion. Because in his opinion, Yale is the best school, even though Harvard is also a very good school as well, which he admits. It's still in the Ivy League. They have to have control over everything, and it's only so they have bragging rights, not because they just care so much about Rory. Then as soon as he can't rationalize his behavior, he just shuts down. Like who? Like Emily. As I keep saying, they feel like Lorelai isn't smart enough and a good enough mother to know what her child wants or even know what's best for her child. It's insulting. He insults her intelligence, he downplays everything that she feels. We're getting a very clear image into how Lorelai was raised in this scene. As they say, old habits die hard. Why do they say that? Because habits are hard to break. This is habitual behavior. They have probably been doing this to Lorelai since she was very young, which is something that she often says. Even Emily following Lorelai telling her what to do, they expect her to just stay there and take their disrespect. It was disrespectful because the way he went about it. He lied. Richard lied, and there's no excuse for it. I mean, like, what Lorelai said about it not being their choice was right. I hated listening to Emily just mock Lorelai about her trauma. People have to understand, it's not about the fact that he wanted her to get into a good school. Like, okay, duh, he wanted her to get into a good school. Like, that's a given. Most parents or most grandparents want the best for their children or grandchildren. That's not the part that's wrong. The part that's wrong is that he went behind their back. The part that's wrong is that he lied. The part that's wrong is the dishonesty. That is the problem, not the part about him wanting her to get into a good school, because he could have wanted her to get into a good school, but he could have been honest about it the whole step of the way. But he lied to get what he wanted. And the problem with that, it's about the principle. And I know people hate when people say that, like, but it's about the principle. You don't lie to people to get what you want. The part that matters is the fact that this is a representation for how he behaves in all aspects of their lives. In order to get what he wants, he lies to get what he wants. He manipulates to get what he wants. And Emily does the exact same thing. And Richard often gets to hide behind being such a great grandfather because of his quietness, I guess, because his nature is often a lot like Rory's, and it feels like he's in the background, but he's not as in the background because he also allows his mother to disrespect his wife all the time. I was so happy to hear Rory stand up for herself. You know it's bad when even Emily is pissed off at Richard because she knows that he was wrong. But then again, it's like she really doesn't have a lot of room. Like, this is classic Emily. To me, I want people to remember, it's not about the fact that yes, Yale could be a better option for them. All that I just said is not to say that Yale could not possibly be a better option for Rory and Lorelai because of their relationship. Yes, Emily was right that Yale might be closer and it might benefit them, but it's not about them. It's not up to them as the grandparents to point this out and try to pose the situation as though they know better than Lorelai or Rory. I keep saying that they're not trusting their decision making. They're questioning them every step of the way. Instead of the approach being like, hey, I heard about Yale and, you know, I don't know if you guys ever thought about this or not, but because you guys are so close, it might behoove you to go to Yale instead of Harvard because you'd be closer to your mom. That would be a much more natural way of bringing this up. But to literally force somebody to go to a meeting unprepared, knowing how serious they are about their academics, that is messed up. Rory and Jess had their first kiss as an official couple. Notice how after they kiss, that's the last time we ever see Jess with a cigarette. I want people to also think about something else too. If Lorelai was as controlling as people think she is, why didn't she try to stop Rory from being with Jess even though she already knew that they were secretly meeting up? There's no scene at all where after this, like, she tries to confront Rory, where she tries to make Rory feel bad about meeting up with Jess. If she's that controlling, if she's that much of a bad mom, why did she not try to stop Jess and Rory from meeting up? Rory goes to apologize to Dean, which I can respect, but it's the fact that, like, what happens over the next few years just does not match his energy at all. That's the part I can't get with. At the end, we see Rory and Lorelai both reading Yale packets. In episode 9, I discussed most of this episode in my season 3 Emily Gilmore manipulation video. One of my favorite things about this episode though is that we get more of Dave and Lane. Lane returns Dave's Bible and Dave kisses her. Dean confronts Jess while Jess is taking the trash out, and it, even to this day, like even almost a year later since my Why Everybody Hates Dean Forrester video, this is still one of the stupidest things I have ever seen from a character on television. Dean saying that this is his town when he's from Chicago is wild. In episode 10, Paris cancels their regular student council meeting and announces that she's getting closer with Jamie after meeting his parents. Seeing Paris crazy about a boy who actually likes her is so nice. Dean comes over to Lorelai and Rory's to drop off some of Rory's things. I really like the way that Lorelai is checking in with Rory about how she feels, and then once Rory clearly doesn't want to talk about it, she backs off and lets her go to her room. Even though I love Rory and Jess, them walking around the town making out is awkward for me personally because I hate PDA. Lorelai is trying to get Richard a birthday present for his birthday. I didn't talk about this with the last episode, but one more thing I also want to say with the whole Richard thing, when they do stuff like that, it makes it a lot easier for Lorelai to believe that they would do something like that. Like, it's not completely unwarranted. They're building a reputation for themselves, that that's something that they do. So as we see in episode 9, the effects of that kind of manipulation is that now every time something happens in that same realm, because Lorelai and Rory have been traumatized by it, it's easier for them to think that they're responsible for certain things even if they didn't actually do it. We see that also with the episode where Christopher just randomly shows up to the Friday night dinners to try to talk to Lorelai. It's easy to blame things on them because they have a history of doing this kind of stuff. Dean and Rory meet up to discuss being just friends. Trix shows up at the Gilmores. Me personally, I really don't have any issues with Trix other than like maybe the obvious, because she basically just treats Emily how Emily treats Lorelai. What I can appreciate is that even though she may have been unimpressed with Lorelai's house, she didn't say anything about it or take any opportunities to make her feel bad about it. Something important to pay attention to when Rory tells Jess about meeting up with Dean is how shocked she seems that Jess didn't go off. I think because of how Dean has reacted in the past, it caused Rory to be more hesitant to tell Jess about things. What I love about it is that Jess does not take his feelings out on Rory. Instead, he goes to the person who's actually behind the situation. He calls Dean out for his sad attempt to get Rory back. And my issue with Dean is that he's acting like he just has to be with Rory. I said that in my Why Everybody Hates Dean Forrester video, but I want to say it one more time. He acts like he has to be with Rory. Like there's no other person in town that he could possibly want to be with. Like, y'all are young, y'all are in high school, and I get it, like that's the whole point, but you do not have to be with Rory. I don't even really get what the attraction is. Like, I don't get why he wants to be with her anyway. Like, they don't seem to have a lot in common. Trix announces that she's leaving London. I just find it so funny how bold Richard is to do what he did to Rory, but he still hides behind the pants skirts of his mother. Like, he's a real coward. Like, and again, I'm not talking about the actor at all. Like, that would be completely horrible actually. But the character of Richard Gilmore, like, he is a complete clown. And you don't really think about it. Like, the first few times you watch the show, you really don't think about how messed up Richard is. But the more and more I rewatch and have to really pay attention to certain things, like, he's truly horrible. Is he worse than Emily? Honestly, I don't know. Because it's like he doesn't have as many instances, but it's like we don't know what he's saying behind the scenes. Like we don't know how this kind of stuff is orchestrated. Like we don't know if he plays a much bigger role in the background than what they let on in the show. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I can't wait to see you guys in the next one.